The woman walked into my courtroom holding a red folder against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Her hands were shaking, her lips were dry, and the man standing behind her, her husband, smiled like he had already won before the trial even began. I have seen guilty men panic. I have seen innocent men cry. But I had never seen a man look that calm while his wife looked like she was walking into her own funeral. The case was supposed to be simple: a divorce hearing, a dispute over money, a claim that her husband, Grant Whitmore, had hidden assets during their marriage. That was all the paperwork said. But paperwork lies in ways people don't. The second I looked at his wife, Claire Whitmore, I knew this case was not about money. It was about fear. Grant Whitmore was the kind of man juries trusted too quickly. Expensive suit, perfect haircut, clean voice, calm eyes. He looked like a man who donated to hospitals, shook hands with governors, and smiled for charity photos. His attorney called him a respected businessman. Claire's attorney called him a dangerous liar. But Claire herself barely spoke. She just sat there, pale and silent, gripping that red folder so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then I asked one simple question. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you afraid of your husband?" The courtroom went quiet. Grant smiled wider. Claire looked at me, then looked at him. And in that moment, I saw something I have never forgotten. She did not look like a woman afraid of losing a divorce. She looked like a woman afraid of surviving it. Her attorney stood and said, "Your Honor, my client has evidence that Mr. Whitmore has been hiding more than money." Grant's smiles disappeared for half a second. Only half a second. But I saw it. That tiny crack told me everything. Claire slowly opened the red folder and pulled out a photograph. At first, nobody understood what they were seeing. It looked like an ordinary parking garage, a black SUV, a man in a coat. But then Claire's attorney placed the image on the evidence screen and zoomed in. The man in the coat was Grant. And standing beside him was a woman everyone in that courtroom believed had died 3 years earlier. Grant's first wife. The gallery gasped so loudly I had to strike my gavel. Claire began crying silently. Grant leaned toward his attorney and whispered something fast. That was the first time he looked nervous. And believe me, when a man like Grant Whitmore gets nervous, it means the truth is finally close enough to hurt him. The prosecutor was not involved when the hearing began, but within 20 minutes, I ordered a recess and requested law enforcement review the evidence immediately. Because if that photo was real, then this divorce case had just become something much darker. Claire's attorney explained that Claire had discovered the photograph hidden inside an old laptop Grant had tried to destroy. The laptop had been recovered from a storage unit registered under a fake company name. At first, Claire thought it contained business documents, bank transfers, offshore accounts, secret property records, but then she found a folder named Insurance. Inside that folder were photographs, dozens of them, her home, her car, her office, her sister's apartment. And one photo that changed everything: Grant standing beside his supposedly dead first wife, Vanessa Whitmore, behind a private medical clinic in Denver. Grant's attorney immediately called it fake. He said the image was edited. He said Claire was emotionally unstable. He said divorce makes people desperate. I listened carefully. Then I watched Claire. She did not look desperate. She looked exhausted. There is a difference. Desperate people reach for attention. Exhausted people reach for escape. When court resumed, Grant's attorney tried to regain control. He stood tall, smiled politely, and told the court, "Your Honor, my client is being targeted by a woman who wants money and revenge." Before I could respond, Claire suddenly stood. Her attorney tried to stop her, but she looked directly at me and said, "I don't want his money. I want him to stop pretending she's dead." The courtroom froze. Grant turned his head slowly toward her, not angry, not shocked. "Warning, I saw it clearly. Claire saw it too." Her voice broke, but she kept talking. "He told me she died in a boating accident. He cried at her memorial. He made me visit her grave." A woman in the gallery whispered, "Oh my God." Claire pointed toward the evidence screen. "But she's alive. And if she's alive, then everything he told me about our marriage is a lie." That sentence changed the entire room, because suddenly everyone understood the same terrifying question. Why would a man fake the death of his first wife? And worse, what was he planning to do to the second one? Grant's face hardened. For the first time, the perfect husband disappeared. His eyes went cold. His jaw tightened. He looked at Claire like she had broken a rule she was never supposed to break. That was when I knew this case had teeth. Claire's attorney called the first witness, a former housekeeper named Maria Ellis. She was not dramatic. She was not emotional. She was quiet, nervous, and visibly uncomfortable being in that courtroom. She testified that while working for the Whitmores, she often heard Grant speaking on the phone late at night in a locked office. She didn't understand everything, but she remembered one sentence clearly. She won't find out until it's too late. Grant stared at her without blinking. Maria looked down immediately. Then she said something even worse. One night, she entered the hallway near Grant's office and heard a woman crying through his phone speaker. Maria said the woman sounded scared. The woman kept saying, "You promised I'd be safe." Claire covered her mouth. Grant's attorney objected loudly. I allowed limited questioning. The courtroom was no longer bored. Nobody was looking at their phone. Nobody was shifting in their seat. Every face in that room was locked on the witness stand because this was no longer a divorce. This was a puzzle. And every new piece made Grant Whitmore look less like a husband and more like a man who had built an entire life out of locked doors. Then Claire's attorney played the first audio recording. It was short. Only 18 seconds. At first, we heard static. Then Grant's voice, calm, controlled, cold. "She doesn't know about Vanessa. Keep it that way until the papers are signed." The courtroom exploded. Claire dropped her head and started sobbing. Grant's attorney jumped to his feet. Grant did not move. That was what disturbed me most. He did not deny it. He did not panic. He simply sat there, eyes forward, as if he was calculating who had betrayed him. I leaned forward and looked directly at him. "Mr. Whitmore," I said, "I strongly suggest you remain silent unless advised otherwise by counsel." He looked up at me and smiled again. But this time, the smile did not look charming. It looked dangerous. Then he said quietly, "Your Honor, my wife has no idea what she has started." The entire courtroom went silent. Not because he shouted, because he didn't. And sometimes the quietest threats are the ones that chill a courtroom the fastest. By the end of that first day, one thing was clear. Claire Whitmore had not walked into court to win a divorce. She had walked in to expose a lie. But none of us understood yet that the lie was only the beginning. Because the next morning, investigators would find something inside Grant's storage unit that made even the officers step back in shock. And when that evidence appeared on the courtroom screen, Claire realized the woman in the photograph was not the only one Grant had tried to erase. The next morning, the courthouse did not feel the same. Usually, divorce hearings are quiet, boring, predictable. Lawyers arguing about money while exhausted couples avoid eye contact. But when I walked into court the following morning, reporters were already lining the hallway outside. Cameras, whispering deputies, nervous clerks. Everyone had heard about Grant Whitmore, and everyone wanted to know the same thing. Why would a man fake his wife's death? But by then, that question was already becoming too small, because overnight, investigators searched the storage unit connected to Grant's fake company account, and what they found inside changed everything. Claire arrived wearing the same cream-colored blouse from the previous day, but something about her had changed. She no longer looked confused. She looked terrified, not because she doubted herself anymore, because she knew she had been right. Grant entered the courtroom 10 minutes later with a completely different energy than before. He still wore the expensive suit, still walked calmly, still looked polished, but now there was tension underneath him. The kind of tension powerful men carry when they realize they are no longer controlling the room. And believe me, Grant Whitmore was a man obsessed with control. The prosecutor officially joined the hearing that morning after detectives discovered potential evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and identity falsification. That alone caused murmurs across the gallery, but the room became completely silent when Detective Raymond Cole took the witness stand. He was a veteran investigator, 20 years in financial crimes and organized fraud cases. Men like him do not get emotional easily, but even he looked disturbed. The prosecutor asked him what officers found inside the storage unit. Detective Cole paused before answering. "Thousands of files," he said quietly. "Surveillance records, financial transfers, multiple passports, burner phones, hidden contracts." Claire lowered her head immediately. The prosecutor then asked the question everybody was waiting for. "Did you find evidence connected to Vanessa Whitmore?" Detective Cole nodded slowly, and then the courtroom screen turned on. The first image appeared, a photograph taken only 4 months earlier. Vanessa Whitmore was alive. The courtroom erupted instantly. People stood up. Someone near the back whispered, "No way." Claire looked like the air had been ripped out of her lungs. But that wasn't even the worst part, because Vanessa did not look kidnapped. She looked hidden, expensive clothes, dyed hair, different identity documents. She had been living under another name in Arizona for nearly 3 years. The prosecutor stepped closer to the jury box. "Detective," he asked carefully, "did your investigation determine whether Vanessa Whitmore disappeared willingly?" The detective hesitated. That hesitation changed the room instantly. Then he answered, "At first, we believed she did." Claire looked confused. Grant leaned back slightly in his chair for the first time all trial. Then Detective Cole said the sentence that made my stomach tighten. "But after reviewing the recovered recordings, we no longer believe Vanessa was hiding from the world." He looked directly toward Grant. "We believe she was hiding from him." The courtroom exploded again. Grant's attorney objected immediately, but nobody was listening anymore, because suddenly the entire story shifted. This wasn't a rich husband secretly helping his ex-wife disappear. This looked like a man forcing women to vanish. The prosecutor played another recovered recording. This one was clearer than the last. Grant's voice filled the courtroom speakers calmly. "You don't leave unless I say you leave." A woman's voice answered quietly. "It was Vanessa." "You said nobody would find me," Grant replied instantly. "That's the point." Claire started crying again. The gallery sat frozen. Grant stared forward without blinking, and that was when I realized something deeply disturbing. He truly believed he had done nothing wrong. The prosecutor approached the evidence table slowly. "Your Honor," he said, "investigators also recovered personal journals belonging to Vanessa Whitmore." The courtroom became completely silent. A leather notebook appeared on the screen. Inside were handwritten entries spanning nearly 2 years. At first, the entries sounded confused, emotional, lonely, then they became terrifying. One entry read, "He says the world is dangerous without him." Another, "He controls every account, every phone, every place I go." Then the prosecutor read the final entry investigators recovered, and I will never forget the silence after those words. "If anything happens to Claire, it means he finally got tired of pretending." Claire covered her mouth. A woman in the gallery started crying softly. Grant finally reacted emotionally. Not sadness, not guilt. Anger. Real anger. His jaw tightened so hard the muscles in his face twitched. And honestly, that scared me more than the evidence. Because powerful men can survive humiliation, but men like Grant cannot survive losing ownership. The prosecutor continued carefully. Detectives discovered Grant had created false medical documents, offshore transfers, fake insurance claims, and shell companies connected to Vanessa's disappearance. Millions of dollars moved through hidden accounts after her death. But then came the moment nobody expected. Detective Cole revealed investigators also found a second hidden file inside Grant's laptop. The file was named Claire. The entire courtroom went still. Grant's attorney immediately stood up. "Your Honor, we object." I overruled him before he even finished speaking, because by then I needed to know what kind of man was sitting in front of me. The prosecutor opened the folder, and Claire's entire face went pale. Schedules, photos, security notes. Her favorite restaurants, her sister's work address, private medical records, every detail of her life organized like a surveillance project. But one document made the entire room freeze, a typed note titled, Phase 2. The prosecutor read it slowly. "If Claire becomes unstable during proceedings, initiate emotional dependency response, restrict financial access, increase isolation, monitor outside communication." Claire whispered, "Oh my God." Grant finally spoke for the first time that morning. "She's twisting everything." But nobody believed him anymore, because the folder kept going. There were recordings, dozens of them. Claire sleeping, Claire crying, Claire speaking privately on phone calls she never knew were recorded. The courtroom atmosphere became suffocating. Even deputies looked disturbed. And then the prosecutor opened the final file. A photograph, Claire standing alone outside a pharmacy. Taken only 6 days earlier, underneath the image was one sentence typed in black letters. "She's starting to ask too many questions." The courtroom exploded. Grant's attorney demanded immediate recess. Claire broke down completely. And for the first time since this trial began, Grant Whitmore lost control publicly. He slammed both hands onto the table so hard people jumped. "Enough!" he shouted. The room froze, because his voice no longer sounded calm. It sounded dangerous. Really dangerous. He pointed toward Claire with fury burning across his face. "You were never supposed to see those files." Silence, bomb a little silence. Grant realized what he had just said 1 second too late. Claire looked at him like she was finally seeing the real man beneath the perfect husband mask. And honestly, so was everybody else. Deputies moved closer instantly. The prosecutor stared at Grant without speaking. Then Grant slowly sat back down. But the damage was done because for the first time, the courtroom saw exactly who he really was. Not a businessman, not a husband, not a victim of a bitter divorce, a controller, a watcher, a man who treated people like possessions. And deep down, AP had the horrible feeling that Claire Whitmore was still in danger, sitting only 20 feet away from him. But none of us understood yet how far Grant was willing to go to protect his secrets. Because less than 1 hour later, a woman nobody expected would walk through those courtroom doors, and the second Claire saw her face, she screamed. Claire's scream echoed through the courtroom so suddenly that even the deputies turned in shock. Every person in that room looked toward the courtroom entrance at the exact same time, and standing there was Vanessa Whitmore, alive, real, and terrified. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. Reporters near the back lowered their cameras like their brains could not process what they were seeing. Claire stood frozen beside her attorney, with tears already pouring down her face. Grant Whitmore slowly turned in his chair toward the entrance. And for the first time since this case began, AB saw fear in his eyes, not anger, not control, fear. Vanessa looked thinner than the photographs investigators recovered. Pale skin, dark circles beneath exhausted eyes. She wore oversized sunglasses even inside the courtroom, like she still expected someone to recognize her. But the second she looked at Grant, her body visibly trembled. That told me everything. The prosecutor moved carefully toward her. "Ms. Whitmore," he said softly, "are you willing to testify?" Vanessa looked at Grant again, and Grant shook his head once, very slightly. Most people would never have noticed it, but I did. It was not a warning, it was a command. And Vanessa immediately looked down at the floor. That tiny moment chilled me more than any evidence we had seen so far. Because even after disappearing for years, she was still afraid of him. I ordered additional deputies into the courtroom immediately. Vanessa slowly took the witness stand while reporters outside the courthouse nearly caused chaos trying to push through security barriers. By then, news helicopters were circling overhead. The entire country was watching this trial live. But inside that courtroom, it suddenly felt very small, very quiet. Vanessa barely touched the microphone when she started speaking. "I didn't die," she whispered. Nobody moved. Claire looked completely shattered hearing the words directly from her. Vanessa swallowed hard before continuing. "Grant made me disappear." The gallery exploded. People started talking all at once. Grant's attorney jumped up immediately. "Your Honor, this witness has clearly been manipulated." "Sit down," I said sharply. Because at that moment, I wanted the truth more than I wanted procedure. Vanessa explained that during the final years of her marriage, Grant became obsessed with control. At first, it was subtle, tracking her spending, monitoring her calls, isolating her from friends. Then it became psychological. "He liked making people dependent," she said quietly. Claire started crying harder because every sentence Vanessa spoke sounded exactly like her own marriage. Vanessa described how Grant convinced her the outside world was dangerous, that business rivals wanted to destroy them, that people were watching the house, that she needed protection. And eventually, she whispered, "You stop realizing the danger is him." The courtroom remained completely silent. Grant stared forward without blinking. Vanessa then revealed the boating accident had been staged entirely. Fake witnesses, fake reports, fake medical paperwork. Grant created the entire death narrative himself using corrupt financial connections and falsified records. But then she said something that made my stomach turn. "He told me disappearing was the only way I'd survive." Claire whispered, "So, oh my God." Vanessa nodded slowly through tears. "He said if I ever tried exposing him publicly, nobody would ever find me again." Grant finally spoke. "She's lying." But his voice no longer sounded confident. It sounded desperate. And desperate men are dangerous men. The prosecutor approached Vanessa carefully. "Why come forward now?" Vanessa looked directly toward Claire. "Because I found out he was doing the same thing to her." The room froze again. Vanessa explained that 6 months earlier, Grant secretly contacted her through encrypted messaging apps after years of silence. At first, she thought he wanted closure. Instead, he wanted advice. The prosecutor leaned forward slowly. "Advice about what?" Vanessa's voice broke completely. "How to make Claire emotionally dependent faster." The courtroom exploded louder than at any previous point in the trial. Claire nearly collapsed. Grant stood up instantly shouting, "That's not true." Deputies moved toward him immediately. Vanessa was crying openly now. He said Claire was becoming difficult. He said she was asking too many questions about money and hidden accounts. Claire looked physically sick. Then Vanessa said the sentence that changed the entire trial forever. He asked me how long it took before I stopped trying to escape. Complete silence. Even the reporters stopped moving. Grant looked around the courtroom, realizing nobody saw him as human anymore. They saw what he truly was. And honestly, so did I. The prosecutor introduced another recovered recording. This one had been found only hours earlier on one of Grant's burner phones. The audio began playing. Grant's voice filled the courtroom calmly. Fear works better when they think you're protecting them. Then Vanessa's voice answered quietly. You're going to destroy her too. Grant laughed softly, not loud, not dramatic, cold. She'll survive as long as she obeys. Claire covered her face and started sobbing uncontrollably. A woman in the gallery yelled, "Monster." Grant's attorney demanded mistrial. I denied it instantly, because the truth was finally standing in full daylight, and Grant Whitmore knew it. Then the prosecutor revealed the final piece of evidence. Detectives recovered travel documents from Grant's hidden safe only 2 nights earlier. Fake passports, cash reserves, international property records. But one passport had Claire's photograph attached under a fake identity. The courtroom went dead silent. Claire looked completely frozen. The prosecutor held up the passport slowly. Investigators believe Mr. Whitmore was preparing to relocate Mrs. Whitmore internationally without public documentation immediately after finalizing marital control of her assets. The room exploded into chaos. People were shouting openly now. Grant suddenly snapped, really snapped. "You have no idea what she's like," he screamed toward the courtroom. Deputies rushed toward him. Claire flinched instantly. And that reaction alone told everybody exactly how many times she had seen this side of him before. Grant pointed toward Vanessa violently. "She ruined everything," then toward Claire. "You ruined everything." And suddenly, the perfect businessman disappeared completely. No calm voice, no polished image, no fake charm, just rage. Pure rage, the kind that had probably lived underneath him for years. Vanessa started crying harder. Claire looked terrified. And then Grant shouted the one sentence that ended his entire life forever. "I gave both of you everything." He slammed his fist onto the table again. "And this is how you repay me." Nobody in that courtroom looked scared anymore, not even Claire. Because finally, everyone could see the truth. Grant Whitmore never loved those women. He owned them, or at least, he believed he did. Deputies restrained him completely as he continued shouting. Reporters ran from the room to broadcast updates live. The gallery erupted into panic and noise. But through all of it, one moment stayed with me more than anything else. Claire slowly walked toward Vanessa. And instead of anger, instead of jealousy, instead of betrayal, she hugged her. Both women collapsed crying in the middle of that courtroom while Grant screamed behind deputies in handcuffs. And honestly, that was the exact moment he lost. Not when the evidence appeared, not when Vanessa testified, not when the recordings played. He lost the second fear stopped controlling them. 3 months later, Grant Whitmore was convicted on multiple federal charges, including fraud, coercive control, unlawful surveillance, identity falsification, financial crimes, and witness intimidation. But the ending people remember most was not the sentence. It was what Claire said while leaving the courthouse. Reporters surrounded her, asking whether she hated Grant after everything he had done. Claire stopped walking, looked directly into the cameras, and quietly said, "The scariest people aren't the ones who scream at you. They're the ones who smile while destroying your life." Then she walked away beside Vanessa, free for the first time in years. And as I watched those 2 women disappear down the courthouse steps together, AP realized something I still think about to this day. Fear can control people for a long time. But eventually, truth always gets louder.